They poured my creek into a coffin, and nature took her revenge. By spring, their million-dollar home sat underwater while my porch stayed dry. When the FBI and environmental agents marched up the HOA president's front steps, I didn't cheer. I just listened to Pine Creek breathe again like it had been holding its breath for months. My name's Daniel Ross. I'm 58, retired hydrologist with the Army Corps living out in Red Haven, Colorado. 2 acres, a workshop full of old machines, and a piece of Pine Creek that's been in my family since 1873. I used to start my mornings with coffee on the back steps, listening to the water run against the granite like it was telling old stories, the kind that don't need witnesses. Life was quiet, predictable, and a little lonely in a comfortable way. Until Willowbrook Meadows moved in next door with their manicured lawns, matching shutters, and an HOA that thought heritage meant crown molding and uniform mailboxes. Their president, Brenda Langford, looked like a realtor poster brought to life. Pearl's white Lexus SUV smile tight enough to slice glass. We never even met over the fence. Instead, I got a certified letter. Unsightly automotive parts visible from neighboring properties. Fines of $200 a day until corrected. The parts they were talking about were my engine restorations, my livelihood, my craft. I read it twice under the kitchen light, let the heat climb my neck, then smiled. My land predates their bylaws by a century. My water rights are carved in stone older than statehood. I sent her a short, not-so-sweet letter back, polite on the surface, loaded with property law. Told them their reach stopped at my fence. But Brenda didn't hear no. She heard try harder. Within weeks, I was getting anonymous complaints to the county claims of unlicensed commercial activity, noise violations, even pollution. An inspector came out, tripped over a crankshaft, and left muttering apologies. Then her HOA board hired a Denver law firm to file a nuisance water flow complaint. They accused me of endangering their subdivision and demanded I fund a $50,000 impact study. That's when I called Pete, old buddy from the Colorado Water Authority. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the phone. "Danny," he said, "they're using watershed maps from 1967. Wrong river, wrong everything." We handed over updated surveys and walked the county through prior appropriation doctrine. 2 weeks later, the case was thrown out. I figured that'd be the end of it. But Brenda didn't lick her wounds. She sharpened them. A month later, while my wife Claire and I were in Oregon visiting our daughter Brenda, held an emergency HOA meeting. She sent notice to an old address I hadn't used in 15 years, then dimmed the lights for a slideshow of erosion damage. It was fake obvious to anyone who's ever seen real riverbank wear, but her audience wasn't exactly outdoorsy. She pushed through a special assessment and hired a company named Pinnacle Construction to fix my creek. When I drove home and turned down my dirt road, I could hear it before I saw it. Diesel engines, jackhammers, cement churning where water used to run. My creek, Pine Creek, was gone. In its place was a shallow concrete trough straight as a rifle barrel. They buried my grandfather's boulders, sealed the gravel beds where trout used to spawn. Claire stood beside me, her coat zipped up to her chin, eyes glassy. "They killed it," she whispered. I couldn't even argue. I swallowed the rage, took photos from every angle, measured flow rates with my grandfather's old survey rod, collected water samples in labeled jars. Then I dug into Pinnacle's record: 3 EPA violations and 5 years fines for unpermitted waterway work. I filed complaints with everyone I could think of, the county, the state, the EPA, and called the local Trout Unlimited chapter. Then came Edwin Krochik, one of the few residents in Willowbrook who still cut his own grass. He knocked on my door, holding a cheap recorder. "You should hear this," he said. Brenda's voice crackled through. "Flood mitigation is a narrative. Control is the product. Not flood control, property control." That line stayed in my head for days. A week later, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell showed up, third-year law student, fierce eyes banker's box under her arm. She'd been looking into the HOA's financials for a research project. They billed $127,000 for work worth maybe $40,000, she said, spreading papers across my workbench. The rest went to consulting and rush fees companies linked to Brenda's friends. It's embezzlement, Mr. Ross, hiding in plain sight. I wish I could say I stayed strong, but that night sitting alone in the workshop surrounded by metal and silence, the weight crushed me. The lawsuits, the money, the reputation, it all felt too heavy. Small towns remember the wrong things. I thought about selling, walking away, starting over somewhere else. Then, rummaging through an old drawer, I found my grandfather's 1973 report to the county. His handwriting was neat, careful. He'd drawn the floodplain by hand, warning that channelizing this section would increase velocity and undermine foundations downstream, underlined twice. Concrete here will increase flood risk by 300%. His note at the bottom said, "Respect water, or it'll teach you respect the hard way." I stared at that sentence until my eyes burned. Then I said it out loud. "All right, Grandpa, let's fight." By the end of the week, I'd filed 4 actions. Federal Clean Water Act violations, interference with state water rights, county code violations, and civil fraud. Trout Unlimited signed on. Dr. Angela Ruiz from Colorado State modeled the flood risk. The EPA opened a file. The local paper dubbed it the Creek War. Brenda retaliated the only way she knew how: dirty. One night, vandals broke into my shop, tipped over my restored 72 Bonneville, and sugared the gas tank. My security cameras caught a white Lexus idling at the end of the drive. Brenda's plate. Days later, she called asking to settle this privately. I met her in her over-decorated HOA office, fake succulents on every shelf. She slid a manila envelope across the desk. $750,000, she said. "You leave the county sign over your water rights and we both move on." When I didn't respond, her smile vanished. Legal battles crush families, Daniel. Think about Claire's career. I left the recorder running in my pocket the whole time. Spring came early and hot. Snow melted fast, turning the mountains into roaring veins of water. Dr. Ruiz called me. "Daniel, the velocity's off the charts," she said. "If they poured that concrete without outflow reinforcements, it's going to undercut their foundations." Meanwhile, the HOA was imploding. Edwin told me members were resigning. Homeowners found out their insurance policies were void because the drainage changes hadn't been permitted. Brenda's empire was crumbling, but she still had one desperate move left. She filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I was stalking and threatening HOA infrastructure. She even used photos of me measuring flow as evidence. The hearing was scheduled for the same week the National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch. In court, the judge was a tall woman named Blackwell Sharp. Quiet, the kind who could make a room hold its breath. Brenda's lawyer went first, painting me as some kind of vengeful old man obsessed with his creek. Then my attorney, Kate Monroe, stood up. She rolled out maps, time-stamped photos, the bribe recording the EPA's open case. Finally, she projected my grandfather's hand-drawn floodplain on the courtroom wall next to live data from Dr. Ruiz's sensors. Halfway through her testimony, an officer hurried up to the bench with a note. The judge frowned, called for recess. Outside, sirens were already wailing. On the courthouse TV, live helicopter footage showed Willowbrook's pristine lawns turning into a brown lake. Water was blasting from the end of the concrete channel, ripping up sod, flooding basements. Workers in neon vests tried to stop it with sandbags, pointless. Nature was taking her turn. My phone buzzed. Edwin texted me a picture, my house porch crooked as ever, bone dry. When we reconvened, Brenda's lawyer blamed historic weather events. Kate didn't even stand. She just pressed play on the recorder. Brenda's voice filled the courtroom. Flood mitigation is a narrative. Control is the product. Judge Blackwell leaned forward. "Ms. Langford," she said, voice cold, "your narrative is unlawful and dangerous." The ruling came swift. Remove the concrete under federal supervision. Restore Pine Creek using natural channel design, pay damages and attorney fees, and submit HOA financials for forensic audit. Then the judge looked past Brenda. "Agents," she said, "you may proceed." By dusk, the FBI and EPA were at her door. Pumps roared in the flooded basements of Willowbrook. I stood at my fence watching a backhoe idle in the mud. Across the cul-de-sac, Brenda stood under her porch light, phone to her ear, staring at the ruined concrete channel. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. The story had already left her hands. The weeks that followed were loud jackhammers tearing up the slab dump trucks, hauling debris flags marking where new bins would go. High school kids planted willow stakes along the banks. Dr. Ruiz nodded as the current curved and slowed the way it was meant to. Edwin became interim HOA president reluctantly. Insurance letters came. Restitution was ordered. Brenda pled to fraud and conspiracy. One morning before sunrise, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. I watched from behind a cottonwood tree as her life got packed into cardboard boxes. No speech, no apology, just the slam of a door. By the time the next melt came, the creek was alive again. The first morning it ran clear. I stepped into the water with my patched waders, feeling the current push around my calves, steady, stubborn, familiar. Claire stood on the bank, hands in her coat pockets, quiet. In the workshop, my grandfather's old diagram hangs over the bench. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Control disguised as order is still control. Concrete is just a shortcut with a bill. And a river. It keeps better records than any HOA board ever could.